Good afternoon. It is April 22nd, and I am Professor Torres with Just the Math. Today's talk is based on an observation I had on social distancing. So, one of the things I was a little concerned about, and I was actually a little concerned about making this video, was the surge that I was expecting due to Easter Sunday. And so I'm going to start by talking about that. And taking a look at Easter Sunday, why was I expecting a surge? Well, people getting together, a lot of close contacts, hugging. Would we expect to see a surge? So you hear me talk a lot about the CDC method, and that's determining when we're expecting the cases to both be reported and how long until death from the time that the cases are reported. So on the 16th and 17th, we saw a surge in Florida cases. And if we go to our calendar, 16th and 17th. According to the CDC, people are going to be diagnosed with COVID approximately 5 to 7 days after they contract it. So, with that information, if we go back, we're looking at Easter Sunday was on the 12th. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 days. So I'm actually looking at uh, 4 to 5 days from being exposed to contraction. Seems to match up very nicely. Also, I've noticed that this date matches the death very accurately using a 4 to 5 day from contraction and then an approximate 13 days to death from that as our peak. So, unfortunately, it looks like Easter Sunday gave us several hundred extra cases of people being affected with COVID. While that's bad news, I begin to think I've seen this kind of pattern before. And where have I seen that? When I looked at the data for Sweden. We see these very large high cases being spiked. And what's interesting about Sweden is that they have uh, social distancing, but their businesses are open. So people are actually allowed to more freely gather than in other countries. And so when they have that option, let's take a look at this spike here on the 17th, and then again on the 8th and 9th, and then again on the 2nd. And you'll notice these are about a week roughly difference between these spike in cases. So if we look at the 17th on our calendar, that would have happened again right about the same time as Florida spike. Uh, but what's interesting is we also had a spike on the 8th and 9th, which happened a little earlier than the Florida spike the previous week, meaning it probably didn't come from Sunday, but maybe came from Saturday. And let's look at the week before. This was on the 2nd, and again, the spike started on the 1st and it lasted through the 3rd. So the spike 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, that would actually translate to the previous week's Friday, Saturday, and Sunday from when they were infected to when they're actually getting tested. And what's really interesting about this, if my data is correct, then, or if my assumption is correct, that it has nothing to do with just the randomness in the testing, we should see the very same pattern in death. And unfortunately, when we look at the deaths in Sweden, we're seeing these same spikes in death that are matching a weekly pattern of 1 week, roughly, between spikes in death. And that's very interesting to observe on that. So, and timeline matching. So basically, we expect a death to occur roughly 13 days, according to CDC, after people were diagnosed. So spike in death on the 21st, and if we subtract 13 days, let's see, 2 weeks plus one, we would have expected people to be getting sick or being diagnosed on the 8th, ninth, and 10th, roughly. And we go back up and we look at what was happening on the 8th, ninth, and 10th. Yes, the spike in being diagnosed matches the spike in death, which means our data matches very accurately. So, what does this tell us that's important? As we look at opening our businesses, can we control what's going to happen with social distancing and businesses open? And what's very promising is yes. During the week, especially, let's take a look at this low day on the 12th, very, very low. And again, roughly a week later, very low on the 20th. So the 12th and the 20th are very low dates. We would expect that to be from what happened 5 days earlier. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, what was happening on 5 days earlier? A Wednesday. Let's take a look at our spike on the 12th. I'm sorry, our trough. Very low amount of people being reported on the 12th. 5 days earlier. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So basically, Tuesdays and Wednesdays, the least likely time for people to socially interact, corresponds to the least amount of cases, which corresponds to the least amount of death. So what Sweden is showing us is businesses can be open, social distancing works, but you go out on the weekend, you start to meet up, families gathering on the weekend. It does have a consequences, has a very large consequences. So if we're going to open up before we have a cure, this is really important for us to consider this information that maybe what we really need to do is not crack down on businesses as much as crack down on weekend activity. Something to consider, and again, the data seems to match that hypothesis at this time. Again, it's just as a hypothesis, but it does match the math. And that is Professor Torres with just the math.